Hello, everybody. Welcome here today. My name is Miggy, and we are going to be talking about prototyping in Figma. I am a designer advocate for Figma for Education. As we are waiting for folks to join us, feel free to find the chat down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Hop into that chat. Make sure you set it to everyone and let us know where you're joining us from. So I am joining you all from Rochester, New York. Rochester, New York. We got Tulsa, Amsterdam, Rhode Island. Wow, Paris, Milan, London, Bay Area. We got a lot of folks in here today. Los Angeles, Georgia. Wow, DC, India, Philippines, Bangladesh, Slovakia. Welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking about prototyping in Figma today. This is going to be centered a little bit more for education. So we're going to dig into some of those weeds as we get started here. Like I said, we'll get started probably about 5 after. So you still have a few moments before we get into the content. We got Vancouver in the house, Canada in the house, Colombia in the house, Portugal, Atlanta, Georgia, Norway. Hey, Egypt, how's it going? Peru, Madrid, Argentina, welcome. Nigeria, Turkey, welcome all. So hi, myself. My name is Miggy. I'm a designer advocate. Here, I'm going to take a quick photo. I already have one there, but I just added another one. So this is a photo widget that we have here in Figma and in FigJam. So there we go. I'm representing Figma for EDU. So you can find me on Twitter at Miggy, on Instagram at InstaMiggy, on TikTok as Professor Figma. And this is my Figma profile. So we're going to be started soon. Just want to know that a couple other things too, Figma and FigJam are free for students and educators. You sign up for Figma, you can verify your education status, you create an education team, and that's going to give you all the professional features that you have there. We got Norway in the house. We got Lagos, London, St. Lucia. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for letting us know. So if you're just joining us, we're still waiting for everybody to pile in, but please let us know in the chat where you're coming from. Also, if you have a question, we will be answering questions at the end of the session today. So I might answer some live, but feel free to use the Q&A panel. So there is a little Q&A panel down there. So feel free to use that and ask any questions that you may have. Like I said before, we're going to be focusing mostly on prototyping today. Brazil, Turkey, Colombia. Man, we got a lot of folks from Colombia in here today. Italy, California. Welcome. Thank you all. All right. Cool. So just a little bit of housekeeping, just so you all know. This is recorded. This will be sent to you after the workshop. Recordings will be sent out next week. Ask questions in the Zoom chat. If you look for I see Anita has a question about the photo widget. If you go in here into the little insert menu and you go to widgets and you type in photo booth, you should get that photo booth widget. And that's by a Figmate here at Figma. So you can go ahead and use that. So if I go in here to the insert menu in Figma, I can click on that photo booth widget. I get the little camera and then I can, say what up. Here, I'll do one more. There we go. And so like the people who just joined us that watched me do that and are just like, what is going on here? Yeah, that's the photo widget. It can be found in the inserts menu. Cool. Oh, I almost triggered it again. I'm going to pop that off. So this will be recorded. Recordings will be sent out next week. Any questions in the Zoom chat? Also, feel free to reach out to education@figma.com to connect. A little bit about today's agenda. I'm going to do some intros. We're doing that right now. This is what I'm going to be covering with prototyping in Figma. So we're going to be doing some basics. I'm going to show you how to do scrolls. So scrolling horizontally, vertically, and in both directions. We're going to cover some of the basic transitions. We're then going to cover Smart Animate, interactive components. So touch on those a little bit lightly, enough for you to get a good bearing on those. And then we're going to talk about video and prototypes. So as education users, you have access to video and prototypes. And we're also going to be talking about sections and what they mean in Figma and how they can help out your prototyping and how they can simplify things in prototyping. And then we're going to be doing a little bit of Q&A. So Cool. So I'm just going to take one more quick moment. Remember that Figma is free for students and educators. You can go to figma.com/education. You can get verified. You could join a demo like you are here today. When you go get verified, it'll actually let you know whether or not you have access to that. Once you have access, you want to make sure that you are setting up an education team. The education team is the benefit. So it doesn't just magically turn all your accounts into education accounts. You have to select which education team you're collaborating with other students, other educators, or other colleagues in working in the education space. All right, cool. So without further ado, we have a lot to cover today. So I'm going to head over to my prototyping 101. If you check in the chat, Alex is sharing out this community file that we have. So because there's so many folks on the live stream today, normally I have a little bit more of an interactive demo, but because there's so many of you, you can actually go ahead and download a copy of the file that I'm starting with today. So feel free to, peruse it. You don't need to follow along. What I care most about is that you're at least understanding, getting inspired by the content, and you at least know where to go to kind of make some of these changes and edits and engage with the prototyping. So here you can see, I can see that a number of you have already, I can see live as you're duplicating this. This is kind of wild, 86, 87, 88. That's kind of cool. I've never seen that before. So feel free to get that. That's some photos of some dogs, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm in the page prototyping 101, and there's a few things that I want to cover here that we're going to be using. So for today, I have a number of just different examples of components that I'm going to be using. These were made ahead of time. So these are components. Components are reusable elements that you can create in Figma. And when you create components and you have main components, they're going to be located here in your assets, over here in your assets, and you'll be able to see all of those there. The components that I'm going to be using for today's workshop, they're going to be located here. As I mentioned, I've already created some of them. So many of them are leveraging auto layout. So what's really cool is that these are responsive components. So basically just made up of shapes and text to generate the look of this style. All right, you can see here I also have some icons, and then I also have some component sets. And once again, we're not going to be covering the details of those, but if you want to, within this file, we do have videos for all three. So these are YouTube videos. These are content that like Figma produces to get you up to speed on how to use auto layout, how to use variant, and how to use component properties. All right, so let's walk through today's example. In today's example, I've made something today, and we're going to start dissecting it. I'm going to show you how this was put together. So I'm in Figma, right? This is my canvas. Over here on the left are my layers. Up here are some of the main tools that I can use. I can create shapes, I can create text, I can draw some other objects there. I can also create frames. So this was made using a frame. Here's a section, here's several other frames. And if I click on the prototype mode, right, I can now see the relationships between these. And that's fundamentally what we're going to be learning about today, is how to create these relationships, how to create these interactions. So I'm going to hit play just so you can see what this prototype looks like. Okay, so this prototype is playing. It's playing inside of an iPhone 14, and I'll show you how to adjust those settings if you have those questions. So basically, I'm creating InstaFig. It's kind of like a prototype image sharing application of some sort. And you'll see here that I'm able to scroll and I can see the content. The content has various heights. And then if I click here, I have a little story content. So this is what you saw in that section there. I'm able to navigate and traverse those, and then even play video as part of that. So I can navigate, and we're going to walk through all of the different steps to kind of make this happen. So here we go. Even if I want to click a little like right there, and I'll even show you how to do some overlays as well. So that's kind of like the heads up of what we're going to be doing and what we're going to be covering. So we're going to start off with some of the basics. So I mentioned here too, if you're in this file, you'll see that anything that I'm not covering, there are also supplemental videos that are there that can help you walk through some of those basic concepts. The main area that we're going to be covering here is how to set up scrolling in a window, and also just how to work with a prototype in general. So prototypes all start with the F key, right? You create a frame and you're going to have another frame with other content, and you're going to create an interaction that's going to go between them both. So let's just go ahead. I'm actually going to wipe these out and walk you through that. So I'm going to press the F key. I'm going to draw out a frame. So when I draw out that frame, I can select that frame. I'm going to go ahead, double click on that name right there. I'm going to call this start. Also here, I feel like I can make the experience just a little bit better for you all by increasing the size of my interface. So let me go ahead and do that really quick. There we go. I've made my interface just a little bit larger, so hopefully that's better for everyone. So here is that first start frame that I created. When I create the frame, let me zoom out one more. So when I create that frame, I'm going to go to the design panel. What's really important about prototyping is knowing when you're in the design panel or when you're in the prototyping panel. So if I press Shift E, right, Shift and E, right, it swaps between me being in the design panel and in the prototype panel. So I can swap back and forth. So right now I'm in the design panel, and when I select the frame that I just created and I go over here to frame, I can choose from a number of presets that I can work from. So I'm going to choose the iPhone 14, and you'll see its width and its height is outlined here. We use the viewport sizes of the device, which just kind of is the essential way that you should be working. Some other applications, they use the physical dimensions. You should always design to the viewport of the device. So here we go. I have my start frame. Now I'm going to hold down the Option key. If you're on Windows, it's the Alt key. I'm going to drag that. I'm going to have a second frame that's going to be called End. We're going to make a very simple prototype here just to test things out. So I'm going to create a rectangle. I press the R key, I draw that rectangle, I'm placing it inside of that frame. If you look over here on the left, you see I have the start frame and I have the end frame, and the rectangle is inside of it. If I want to rename that, I can hit Command R, and I'm going to title that. I'm just going to give this, I'm going to call this button, and I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste that on my end frame. And then over here, I'm just going to make this large and expand and maybe a different color. So we're just going to create a very simple prototype here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the prototype panel. I mentioned before that it's Shift E, right? And that puts us in the prototype panel. So now when I select an object, when you're in prototype mode, you're going to see these little blue pluses show up around the objects that you're using. So I'm going to click on that blue plus, and from it, I'm going to drag out what we call interaction noodles, but you can just think of it as an interaction arrow. So here, when I do that, it's going to bring up this little panel, and this panel is the kind of the center of these interactions. So it has to take place between these two frames. I have these interaction details. I'm going to first decide what is the event. So we're going to create a very basic one. We're going to create on tap. Then we're going to navigate to. This is kind of the behavior, the event that's going to basically take place. And where is it going to? This is the name of the frame. So this is why it's essential that you name those frames accordingly. So then this way you know that your interaction is behaving well. It can also just be as easily done as dragging it over. Then down here, we're going to choose how that takes place. So it can be instant. So let's start off with instant and see how that works. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drag this going back. So on tap, it's going to navigate to, it's going to go to start, it's going to be instant, and it's going to go right on back. So here, start and end. And what happened when I created that interaction, it actually generated this little starting point for me. So if I click right here, I can actually name this. So I'm going to call this simple interaction. These starting points allow you to have multiple prototypes in the same page. So right now we're in the prototyping 101 page, and you've already seen the first prototype that we worked with. Now we have another one. So these are representative of flows. So if I go ahead and I hit play on that, you will see that here is my very basic interaction. When I click, it's going to go to that second frame. It's very no frills. It's immediately going to that frame. And over here on the left, I mentioned the flows. I can easily go back to my first example, and I can go back to the example that I'm currently at. So I'm able to go back and forth. All right, cool. So I'm able to navigate between those two. Let's make that just a little bit spicier just for fun because we're on the live stream today. I'm going to choose Smart Animate, and we're going to talk about Smart Animate shortly, but I just want you to see how quickly you can create something that seems kind of rich and interesting. I'm going to make a little custom Bezier there, right? This is just the type of motion. We're going to talk about what that is. And so now we're going to have that also go back in the same way, right? So each one of these noodles has its own interaction details. That interaction details panel exists between all of those interactions. So I can hit play, and now I can see that we actually have a little animation happening between them. And there's certain conditions that need to be met in order for it to animate, as smoothly as it is. And we'll be talking about that shortly, but I just wanted to show you. So here, this is the creation of a very basic prototype. And I often encourage folks to make very simple prototypes with simple wireframes. You don't want to wait till your design is fully fleshed out or fully done before you begin doing this. Okay, so once again, the interaction details, what you're primarily looking at with here is there's the interaction type. So it can be on tap, on drag. There's any number of things, mouse over, mouse out. So different behaviors that you're going to make with the mouse or cursor, right? Then you're going to have the event. So more often than not, you're going to be navigating between frames, but there are some other event types, and we'll probably cover some of them today. Then you're going to choose that destination or target. Where is it going? So in this event, I created that interaction, and then we're going to that endpoint. And then that endpoint also has an interaction where it's going back in. And then there's a little preview area that'll show you how the transition is going to behave. You can dictate that transition right there. And then down here, I know I did this very briefly, but you can identify the type of motion, whether it's an ease in, an ease out, maybe it's a spring animation. So how was the motion accelerating and deaccelerating as you're kind of creating that? And then lastly, the duration. How long is that transition going to transpire for the interaction that you're creating? Awesome, thank you. So let's just do one more really quick. I know that I have those assets, so I'm just going to hop here. This is directly on the canvas. I'm going to draw another frame, and let's stick with the iPhone 14. Over here are my assets. Once again, I mentioned that these assets were pre-created. I generated them, so I have my little post asset, so I'm able to drag this right in here, right? So I can drag that right in. So these are just, once again, they're made with shapes, text, and lines. And then they're using auto layout, but just as easily to create an interaction between one to the next, what I can do is create another frame. And let's just say I bring this up, I open this up. So I'm going from frame 1 to frame 2. I can easily create that. So on tap, navigate to, right? Frame 4. Once again, you want to make sure that those are named correctly. And then it's going to have a little smart animate interaction. So I'm going to cover this in a little bit. We want to make sure that we add a starting point. So this is just like that quick example, just to kind of recover some of the things that we did. And there we go. So I have a very quick interaction. Let's have that go back. And let's play that one more time, just so you can see how we can easily go from just making simple shapes to making something more meaningful that quickly. All right, I see some folks. We are recording, and I will be recovering. I'm gonna there's gonna be a lot of repetition in here. Cool. So someone was asking about my captioning, my keystroke. Oh, keystroke captioning. Unfortunately, if anybody here wants to learn keystrokes, hit Command. I'm going to give you a keystroke for that. Hit Command P, and you'll get this little menu up here at the top, and then you can type in keyboard shortcuts, and then you will get this wonderful little menu that will help you envision the keyboard shortcuts in using Figma. So once again, if you have difficulty finding that, if you go in the top left and you go quick actions, right? So for international keyboard is going to be Command P or Control P on Windows, and for Apple, I'm sorry, for US and keyboard is going to be Command/. So I can type in Command P and then I can type in keyboard shortcuts and I get this nice little window. All right, cool. And also that can be used for any number of commands. So like, let's say if you forget a command, I'm going to hit Command/, and I type in frame. It will then pull that up and it'll even highlight the keyboard shortcut for you there over on the right. This is actually how I learned Figma. Okay, cool. So scrolling. I'm going to talk to you now a little bit about scrolling and how we can work with this. Any way to maximize left panel? Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show y'all how to scroll here. I'm going to select this frame. I'm going to go to my design panel and I'm going to clip this content just so you can see how it is, right? So I have a component with a bunch of content going this way, and I have a bunch of content going down. So you see that when I select my frame, I'm going to clip content. And when I do that, it kind of cuts everything off. In order to scroll, you need to have overflow content, right? So a frame is going to be a container that you're going to use to place imagery, shapes, and text. And anything that goes outside of those bounds is overflow. So you can opt to see it by going to the design panel here and choosing clip content, and you can toggle that on and off. Right. So even here, I have this frame. I'm going to set that to clip content, and I'm going to clip this content here. So clipping your content is important because scrolling is something that you can enable on and off. So I am going to select this frame. I'm going to go over to prototype window, and you'll see this option right here, overflow scrolling. And there's several options that you can choose from. So you can explicitly state you don't want something to scroll, or you can say, I want it to scroll horizontally, vertically, or both. And you might think, well, what might I use both for? If you're creating a map, that way it can scroll in both directions. So if you think of Google Maps and navigating around that map, that's what you can use that for. So for this, I'm going to employ vertical scrolling. And for this one here, this has horizontal scrolling, and I will show you how to compose those in just a moment. Let's walk through that example. I'm going to select that frame. Once again, I'm going to add a new starting point. So I'm going to call this one scrolling example. And I'm going to hit play. And that's going to take me once again to my prototype view mode. And I can see here's my scrolling example. And you'll see that I'm scrolling up, down, and I'm able to navigate left and right. And the way that that works, I'm going to show you just with some very basic shapes. So I'm going to draw out another frame. And since we are working primarily with the iPhone 14, I'm going to stick with that. David, I added the starting point. There's a number of ways you can do that. When you click at the frame and you go over to the prototype mode, here you can add or remove a starting point. You can also add a starting point by right-clicking, and you'll see add or delete starting point in the context menu when you right-click. So you must be in prototype mode for that to work. So right here, I'm going to create yet again another scrolling example. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in some new rectangles here, right? So I'm just adding them in. I'm going to select this frame. I'm going to go to the design menu, and you'll see that this frame is currently set to clip content. So I'm going to show you a little shortcut key magic real quick. Let's say if I want to have a bunch of these, I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key to drag this down, and then hit Command or Control D to just have a bunch of duplicates, right? So I'm just adding a bunch of these. You'll see they go beyond that frame. And when I click on this frame and I go to prototype, I can set that overflow scrolling to vertical scrolling, right? So now I can go ahead and add another starting point, and I'm just going to call this basic scrolling, and I'm going to hit play. So here I'm doing this just with simple shapes, and you can see that they are now all scrolling. So if I select that frame, go to the design panel, I can unclip that content, and you can see all of that laid out here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows and just drag this over to the right. And I'm going to duplicate a bunch of these. So once again, when I click on that frame, here, I'm going to pull up my layers panel so you can see this here, right? So I'm going to call this my map, right? So I called my frame the map, and you can see all of these rectangles are nested inside of that frame. And so now I'm going to select that frame and clip that content once again. So this is all clipped within here. This time I'm going to use both horizontal and vertical scrolling. So I'm going to select that frame. I'm going to go over to prototype, and here it says vertical scrolling. Now I'm going to change this to horizontal and vertical scrolling. So now I'm going to hit play. So one thing I do want to make sure that you all make sure you're asking questions in the Q&A panel. This way it's easiest for me to get a sense of it. So here I'm able to scroll and navigate. And once again, I'm using a mouse, and I'm clicking through. This will also work on a touchpad. There's also a Figma app on the iPhone and Android that you can download. So then this way you can preview these designs on a live device. Okay. We're not necessarily covering that quite yet, but it is something that you can do. So here we go. I can basically use that to navigate in both directions. So that setting is going to be primarily available. So when I click on this frame, you'll see it in the prototype mode. Sometimes, you're like, oh man, like where was that? You're in the design panel and you're looking for that overflow scrolling. Just remember that anything associated with prototyping is typically going to be in that prototype menu. It's going to be contextual. So when I select the frame, that's when I'm going to see that option. Cool. So I'm sorry, my captions are kind of live. So like I have them turned on here. All right. So let's cover one more aspect of this, right? So I'm gonna draw in, I'm gonna delete some of these for the top portion. And I'm gonna draw out a rectangle. And I'm going to hold down the Option key, Alt key if you're on Windows, drag that over to the right, and hit Command D, Control D on Windows, all the way over. I'm going to create a horizontal scroller that's also going to be placed into this frame. So I'm going to select this all, and I'm going to create this as a component. So here I'm going to create this as a component. So it's like encapsulated. It's like its own little thing. And what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to set my overflow scrolling on this component. I'm going to set this to horizontal scrolling. And you'll see this little thing pop up because right now it sees that there is no content outside of that area. So you're going to get a little warning if it doesn't have the opportunity to scroll. So I'm going to show you how to set the frame to create the ability for it to scroll. So once I've created that component, I have this bounding box area around it. And I'm going to hold down the Command key. If you're on Windows, it's going to be the Control key. And I'm going to change the size of the frame, right? So what I'm doing is I'm basically saying that this is now overflow. I'll show you that one more time. So I dragged a bunch of rectangles. And remember, a rectangle is basically a placeholder for an image, a component, whatever you want it to be. I have all of these rectangles here. I'm going to select this component. I'm going to hold down the Command key, and I'm dragging this over. And so I'm changing the area. And then now when I go to the design panel, I can clip content, and I can see that it is now clipped. So I'm going to drag this component now into this frame. So once again, holding the Command key, I can drag this to both ends. And in the prototype window, this component that I have here, how to edit or add an element when it already became a component. You have to use the main component. So I would recommend that you detach it if you have something that's already existing. So cool. So here I'm going to take this component. I'm actually just going to bring those right in. And you'll see that the overflow scrolling is already set to horizontal. So what's cool about that is when I hit play, oops, let me set this one. I realize I made a mistake here. I don't want it I only want it to go vertically. So let's set horizontal and vertical scrolling. Let's set this one back to just vertical. And here we go. I'm going to drop this in here and hit play. And so now I can scroll vertically, and then here I can scroll horizontally. So when I scroll up and down, that component is going to move up with the content, but internally for itself, it has its own scrolling capability. So that's how here this is working. I have a frame that has all of, these clipped in here, and it allows me to scroll those, right? So you can have multiple of these components. So if I get a copy and I paste an instance of that component, right? So let's say I have two of these. I'm going to press enter and change all of these to red just so you can see them here. So I have now two rows of horizontal scrolling components. There you go. And then I could still scroll vertically. Okay, so pretty quickly you can have a very interactive scrollable prototype. So yes, this will be recorded, this will be shared. So just wanted to share that little bit with you. I did have a question. Somebody didn't understand how I had so many squares. So here what I'm doing is I'm holding down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows, and I'm dragging this out. Right. So the duplicate function recognizes the last thing I did. If I do anything else, this won't work. But because I'm pressing Command D, immediately after duplicating it, it's going to continue to make it in that direction. So same thing here. If I'm going to go to the right, I'm going to hold down the Option key, and then I'm going to press Command D, and then it'll navigate over to the right. Cool. So I don't know what recent feature you're referring to. The Command D has been there since the beginning, and the scrolling has been there since the beginning. This has been at least since there's been prototyping. So let's talk about transitions. So we've primarily focused on scrolling, and now let's start thinking about basic transitions. So here I have these two frames, and I'm going to go to my prototype panel. And in my prototype panel, I know we haven't necessarily covered this yet, but if you click on the canvas, you can change your device. You could change the background color. You have a whole bunch of different settings. You can even see all of the flows that we've been creating. You can rename those flows. So if I say Insta Fig, right, I could rename them. I can actually double click and go to them if I want to. Let me hop back up here. So there's a lot in that prototype panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a transition between these two. I mentioned already that the transition is part of the interactive panel. We've done a couple smart animates, but I want to show you some of the ones that exist currently, just to kind of break down this behavior. So once again, this is the component that we kind of used already. I'll show you how I got the image on there. So if I go to my assets, I drop in the component that I have. I'll show you a really cool plugin. So up here is the inserts menu. I'm going to go to plugins, and I'm going to type in Unsplash. Unsplash is a service. It's free that allows you to insert stock photography generated by their community. And so I'm going to command click, control click on Windows right here and find a photo to place in there. So I'm going to choose this red fox. So the thing that you have to remember about shapes or images and video in Figma is that they are just fills. So if I command click onto this shape, what that's going to do, it's going to deep select that object. You'll see here that it's nothing more than a fill on that shape. So if I want to copy this image and transfer it over to this shape, I command click on it. I select the fill over there. I do command C or control C if you're on Windows. So I copy it. Then I select this one here, and then I can paste it and it'll paste right in. And you'll see too, you're probably like, whoa, this is not the photo of the fox that I wanted. In the image panel, you can choose how the image maps. So here I can say, okay, I want to crop this image and I want it to go right about there. So there we go. So now I have these two frames. This is the beginning of my transition and this is the end. I want it so that way when I click on this image, let me go ahead and let me apply the fill one more time and recrop this image. I want to get it perfect. And so what I want is when I click on this to open up this with a transition. Once again, swapping between design mode, right? I was making some tweaks and adjustments there. Now I'm going to go to prototype mode. When I go to prototype mode, and I select this frame, I select the object that I want to create the transition, right? So I'm selecting that whole card, and now I'm going to navigate over here. So here are the details. On tap, navigate to, right? Transition end, that's the name of the frame. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some of these transitions that we have. I'm going to use a move in, and you'll see when you hover over here, you get almost like a preview of what that looks like, right? That move in transition. I'm going to have this turned on, Smart Animate Matching Layers. I'll explain what that does in a moment. And then here I can choose how I want this to take place. So we actually have a number of different types of tweens, right? So we have these spring animations, but we also have typical eases that you might see in other applications. So for this, I'm going to make it bouncy because why not? I'm just having fun with y'all today. So let's do that bouncy transition. And then here I'm going to click on the wolf and then I'm going to have that go back, right? Same thing. We're going to have this move out. Let's see if that works. I'm going to hit transition start and hit play. So you probably, let me make sure that I do add a new starting point. So once again, I'm going to select my frame. I'm going to come over here, flow starting point. I'm going to add one, and I'm going to call this my Foxy frame. And I'm going to hit play. So here we go. We got the Foxy frame. Might take a second for the image to load. There it is. And I tap, and then there's the wolf. Right. And maybe that transition isn't our cup of tea, but that's okay. That's why we're here working. We want to test this out. We want to iterate on this design. Actually, as a matter of fact, let's say I want to iterate on what that looks like. I'm going to select both of those frames. I'm going to hold down the option key, and I'm going to have another copy of that. Right. I can even create another starting point and just call this Foxy frame 2. It's important to iterate on your designs. You don't want to lose all the work that you have. Sometimes you want to test one scenario against another one to see how it looks or behaves. So now we got Foxy frame and Foxy frame 2. And so when I click on this, I can change, let's say I change it to an ease in and out. And let's do that for both of those, right? I can select both of those arrows. And this is actually new. I can go here and I can change the easing behavior. Oops. Hold on one quick moment. There we go. Sorry, I think I hit reset. So I can select these two and I can change this to ease in and out. So this will ease in and out that way and it'll ease in and out back. So here we go. And I click on this, right? Now it looks a little bit better, right? And then I can actually find that previous one, that first one, right? There's the bounce. And then I could test it against this other one, which is a little bit more traditional. It feels a little bit better. So when I go back, I can change that move out. I can have it push and I can have it push in the opposite direction. So previewing the animation will give you a much better sense of how that transition behaves or performs. So let's take a look at this. There we go. So I went one way and it pushes back. So I can actually make both of those a push transition. So let's say I'm going to push from that direction, and then the going back, it pushes in the opposite direction. So this is going left, and this is going right. And this is important because when you're making prototypes, you want to make sure that the human using it understands where something went. So when I click on this cognitively, I understand that that menu is now over there on the left. So then when I go back, it should go back in the same direction. Otherwise, I'm looking at this and I might get confused to where my stuff went. So that's why it's important to test out those ideas and see how they work. And once again, I can go back to my previous one and see, wow, I've made a big improvement on the way that that looks. All right, cool. So any questions on that? I've seen a bunch of questions, but those are the main transitions. And I'm going to do one more. I'm going to make one more copy, right? So I'm going to select those frames and hold on the Option key. It's Alt key on Windows. I'm going to drag this down. And here I'm going to create yet again another starting point. This is going to be Foxy Frame 3. So let's add another starting point. Foxy Frame 3. There we go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add a little header. I'm going to draw in a shape right into my frame that's just going to sit on top of everything, right? It's going to be this, this black box. It's going to just sit up there, right? And let's say here it kind of moves up, and then here it's down. So when I go to my prototype, I'm going to select both. Select the one going this way. I'm going to turn off Smart Animate Matching Layers just so you can see why I'm going to do this. So let's say if you have like a menu that's up at the top, right? So this is a black bar. I can make that color a little bit more visible so you can see that better. Let me make that blue, and I'm going to make that blue. So when I hit play, we're gonna be sending out the recording next week. So the recording will be sent out. So here I'm going to go to Foxy Frame 3. All right. And basically you'll just see that there's just a shape that's on top of both of them, right? There's this like little shape that's up here, and on the second frame, it kind of goes up a little bit, right? So it's going to go back and forth. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to smart animate between them. So basically we want to look at both and we want to see how is this going to behave? How is this going to transition? And because it's named exactly the same on both of those frames, right? So right here, let's make sure it has a name. So over here, we have this rectangle. It's rectangle 83. We should always name things a little bit better. So I'm going to select them both. Let's just rename them. So I'm just going to call this top bar. I'm going to call this here top bar. And when I hit play, you'll see that we want it to transition. So I'm going to select the arrow going this way. I'm going to choose Smart Animate Matching Layers. And when we go back, I'm going to choose Smart Animate Matching Layers. And what that's going to do now is you'll see that the bar will move up and down as it goes from left to right. So it's basically animating, and I can have this animate off the screen entirely. And when I hit play, you'll see that it moves off. So it's transitioning here, but then it's also applying a smart animate. And the smart animate is what we're going to be talking about in the next section. So once again, having the 3 different sets are going to allow of iteration is going to allow me to see and identify, which is going to be the better one. So oftentimes I encourage early and often prototyping, prototypes that are short and sweet and that demonstrate the concept. So let's talk a little bit more about Smart Animate. And once again, with this file, we have a video that you can play. This is within the community file. Alex has been graciously sharing the community file in the chat as we go. It could be found at figma.com/@education. And so in this file, you can actually view a bunch of the YouTube videos that will elaborate on these concepts with greater depth. So here with Smart Animate, the one thing that you need to remember is that when you're looking at the layers and you're animating between elements, so like, let's say you want item one. Oh, this is actually wrong. Let me do that. How did that get done? All right, so item one should be going to item one. Somehow this got undone. I'll do a little live update here. I'm just gonna hide that, right? Let's just doing a little quick cover up to hide the mistake. There we go. That's what it should look like. Okay, cool. So it should be item one to item one and item two to item two. So this is a frame right here. This is the frame. So I'm going to type that in, frame. It's really hard typing this out. And then these are the things that you want to animate. So you need to make sure that in the layers panel, they're layered accordingly and they have the same names. So right here, this won't work. So item one can't go to item three and item two can't go to item four. And so basically you need that consistent naming and layer order when you're working. And I'll make sure that I correct this in the playground file as well. So once again, I've kind of demonstrated this already. So here I have this kind of like a interactive, I have this component here, and you'll see that when I scale this, this image is set to fill. So the image is going to do anything and everything it can to fill that space. So if I wanted to create a fun transition where this expands out, right, almost even expanding out of the frame, we can have a much more realistic looking output, right? So here you'll see that it's the same component, right? So this is called on this frame. So when I select that frame, by the way, if you double click on a frame, it'll find it right here. So there you go, Smart Animate Begin. Let me make sure. I think I have some extra stuff in here. Let me get rid of that. Okay, cool. So it should just be social post, right? That's the Tiger social post. And then same thing here. This also has a social post. So we're going from this one to this one, and it's that same component. So all we're doing is we're changing the sizing of it. And now we're going to make that transition. So I'm going to go to prototype mode, and I'm going to tap on that, and it's going to go from 1 to 2. This time, instead of using one of those pre-built transitions, we're going to use Smart Animate. Once again, Smart Animate is looking at the layers and it's looking at the order, and Smart Animate can animate size, position, color, but it can only animate very simple properties. So I can animate something coming from the top and expanding, but I won't be able to animate, like, let's say, like individual drawings or like vector shapes. It can only do very simple objects. So here, let's apply that Smart Animate. I'm going to go to custom Bezier just because this is my favorite type of motion curve. It's basically going to be an S. You can draw out those values down here where it's like 0.8, comma 0, comma 0.2, comma 1. So basically these values are just identifying these points, like where that's going and where that's going. So this can actually be used in code in CSS to generate this type of motion. So here I'm going to use that. I'm going to copy those values just so when I tap on this frame, I can go back and you'll see that it keeps my settings, right? It's nice like that, saves me time. So once again, doing the same thing over again, we're going to have the flow starting point, right? So here we go. We're going to start off with this. I'm going to call this tiger card, and let's hit play. So the tiger card right here, when I click, it opens and it closes. It opens and it closes. Yeah, I absolutely love how it saves the previous selection between frames. Like it's a big time saver. And then also if at any point, like if I wanted to test that speed out, right, I can select both of those noodles. I can select both of those noodles. Okay, cool. Thank you, Lauren. I can select both of those noodles and change the duration. I can make it like, let's say 1,000 milliseconds. So now I'm going to click on the tiger card and, it can go much slower. All right. So I know we're kind of like already running a little bit short on time, and I do want to provide some time for questions. I'm going to talk about interactive components really quickly. Once again, you can check this out if you look up interactive components. The thing that I care about here is that y'all understand what an interactive component is. So if I was to go to right here, I'm going to just move this down and move this down. And I'm going to create another frame just for the card. So if I put in, this little card, this card has a little secret associated with it, and that's an interactive component. So when I hit play on this frame, let me make sure that this is the what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the iPhone device. I'm just going to set this to none. So then this way it just plays this frame. I'm going to select that frame and hit play. So I have this frame. So I'm just prototyping this frame out. And I'm going to show you that this heart icon is actually an interactive component. So if I was to take this little heart, right? Once again, a component is anything that is can be reused, on your canvas. I could take a bunch of these, and when I select that frame, I can click, and you'll see the interactive component. It keeps those states. So this is the first time I'm not traversing additional frames, right? To get the difference, right? I'm able to have this little nested bit that keeps that content. And I'll show you how that works. So here, this is what an interactive component looks like. It's basically just multiple kind of nested states. Check out Figma's YouTube. We actually have a bunch of live streams concerning interactive components and a lot of content around that. There's also an interactive component playground file that you can go to figma.com/@figma and look for the interactive components playground file. So here I'll walk you through how that is constructed. So let's say if I create a frame, and I'm just going to put a circle in there, right? Once again, we want to make sure that we're naming things. So here, I'm just going to call this dot, and I'm going to call this dot start. And let's have another one where it's ending, right? So I'm going to make this go from being small. We'll make it go big. We'll change this to dot end. The important thing is that the naming is the same. I'm going to select both of those frames, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create a component set, right? There's multiple ways of doing this, right? If you have an existing component, you can add a variant, but this is another way to do it, create component set. And I'm going to call this, dot. So here I'm going to select both of those frames just so we don't have that white fill. And here on the second frame of the dot, I'm just going to change it to red. So I have these two frames here. Okay, we got to do questions at 3:55. Do you think, is it okay if we go over just a little bit, Alex? Or do we have a hard stop at 4? We can go over just a little bit. Awesome. All right, 5 minutes. All right, cool. Thank you. So here I just want to cover this really quick. So I'm going to go to prototype. And I'm going to do a different interaction type. So instead of on click, I'm going to say while hovering, right? It's going to change to. So instead of navigate, it changes. So it's changing to a different version of itself. And here, once again, we can use Smart Animate. And we're going to have that traverse very, very short period of time. So just like 250 milliseconds. So I can now just copy that first frame of that dot. Oops, and paste it here. And let's do Command D D D D D D D D D D D D. Right. Let's just throw in a bunch of those. So I'm going to select them, hold down the Option key, Alt key on Windows. Right. Make sure you're in the design panel, otherwise it's not going to work. So Command D. So I have this little grid up here. Now, when I select that frame and hit play, you'll see that the little dots, because it does it while it's hovering, and when you're no longer hovering, it goes back to the previous one. So it's a fun activity to learn and to begin to play with that. So I could actually, I could take as many of those as I want, just put them in that background. So here's a more practical example of that. Basically, I'm going to take this interactive component. The way that this looks is it's using drag interactions to go from the first one to the second to the third. Let's replace this. I'm going to put this into the frame. And we're going to do, let's unclip this, right? Clipping is something you have to get good at. And let's just drop in some images. So unsplash, I'm going to hit run. Let's drop in some animals. I love me some animals. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Come on, Fox. There we go. All right, we got the tiger. So now I'm going to clip this. So basically what's happening is that the interactive component, I'm overriding the colors now with the images. So there's a drag interaction that goes once left. And then unfortunately, I don't have enough time to cover this in its entirety, but hopefully this is inspiring for you to see the capabilities of what can be done. Now that I have this interactive component set up, now I can have this sort of like nested, photo gallery. And so here I can drag those down, and, I could have another copy of it, and I can unclip that, and I can replace those images with whatever I want. Let's do one more, and let's hit run. So let's do it a technology one. So 1, 2, and 3. And cool. So now when I clip this, we're going to get down to questions in just a second. Let's go to design. Let's clip that. So now we have 2 little mini galleries inside of the same frame. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. So and then lastly, what I was going to show, video in sections. If you follow me on Twitter and or on LinkedIn, I have been sharing some sections videos, but basically the important thing here is that if you press Shift S, you can have an entire section. And that's what's allowing us to do these sort of nested prototypes. So Shift S, sections, and basically what that means is, when you create the let me make sure this is navigating here. So I'm just going to drag that right to a section. So what I did here was I have this prototype of these dogs going back and forth, and then I'm just navigating to that whole section. And what that's going to allow is to have you have those separate interactions nested and organized in a way that's going to be meaningful. So if I wanted to create another gallery, of just cats, Um, let's see, let's do cats. I can easily do so. And let's just take a quick look. Let's call it our cat gallery. And let's just have something else navigate to it. So here we go. I'm going to click on that, and that'll go to the entire cat gallery. And you can see how that will transpire. So then instantly we have a new cat gallery that's now part of the main prototype. So sections, you want to check those out. It's going to save a bunch of time. So let's head on over. We have some questions here. So a component is basically anything that is reusable. So the point of making a component is to make something that you are going to reuse again and again, that you can override. So the simplest component that you can make could just be like a bit of text made into, like, let's say, a button. And the reason that you make that component is that way you're not recreating the same thing over and over again. If I were to take this, make this into a component, now I can have overrides. And if I change the original bit of the component, I can change, let's say, the font, I could change the color, right? It impacts it. It impacts the other one. And then the other one, this could be 1, this could be 2, and they kind of live as their own with their own overrides. But I can still begin to change how they behave. There's still certain things that controls that behavior. Uh, okay. Replace a fill on an image again. I'll show you that one more time. When you have any shape, you can just copy paste its fill area. So if I was to just copy Lauren's photo, I can paste it right there. And then I can also copy over here off screen Alex's photo, and I can paste it. And just by copying and pasting, it'll change, and it'll change that fill. So you can also go to an image, go here, choose image, and choose an image from your desktop. So like, let's say I have this photo here. This might take a little bit longer to load in. It's a higher res image. But you can also choose images that way. The other thing here is that images behave just like video. So as long as your file is on a team, then you can have video. You can upload and drag video right into here. I'll take a look at one more question. Um, how did I do the quick color matching? I press the I key. So let's say here, if I press a rectangle and I want to press I, and I could grab a color right off of there. So once again, I press I and I can get a color right off of there. Press I and I get the color right off of there. So color matching. Can we control the smoothness and easing of the scroll? Unfortunately, the scroll itself is going to be dependent on the content that's in there. So yes, you can control the scroll in a way that you can see one card at a time. That is the drag behavior. So in the same way that I've constructed this right here. If you want to take a look, the Smart Animate video contains an entire explanation of drag triggers. So you can look up the Smart Animate video on YouTube for Figma, and it'll give you a detail of how those drag triggers work. I'm not quite sure what that question is. Can you set scrolling within a component? Yes, you can control scrolling within a component. As long as you have a frame, you could do that. So you can set that up. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you. Thanks for joining. I know there's a lot of content. There's always so much content. There's always so much to cover. Yeah, let's say, so somebody said, is there a transition to zoom in and out? Basically, you want to create 2 frames, have an object that's scaled up and scaled down. That's how you're going to behave the zoom in and zoom out. All right. So once again, I think we are at time. Thank you all for joining. Be sure to follow Figma. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, and take a look at that.